Thank you, Andy. And can I reiterate Chris and Andy's comments about welcoming you here today. Thanks for spending some time with us. I'm going to talk about challenges and opportunities, of which there are many. And to do that, I'm going to try and explain a bit how we ended up where we're here. What's underlying our approach and what makes sense to us. So the world feels a bit like this, which looks like one of those games of have I got news for you, really. But the world is very, very, very rapidly changing, very, very volatile, not only at the UK level, but geopolitically, internationally as well. It's pretty scary out there to a large degree. And so if you look at the sort of multiplier of Brexit against a very uncertain global economy, it's a very difficult backdrop for us to operate in, and we're aware of that. And we put a lot of time into understanding the deep data of our business. Now, everybody says they do this. My experience is they don't, and I'm going to try and explain to you some examples about how we do that and how we end up doing the things we do, which are often a combination of data, gaps in the market, and the results of our operational experience. So people talk, for example, about the organization's journey. We started from a position where we were dealing with need only, and yet all our customers were telling us they wanted something more than that, and they were telling us that they wanted something better for their kids. They felt that they had limited life chances, so we wanted to help people realize their potential. These are not empty words, and I'll come on to explain them later. We're dealing with a lot of poverty. And the whole issue about welfare reform has been a big issue for us. We aggressively picked that up. We turned it into a positive. We worked really hard with people to make that work for them, or at least to help them through it. Stigma is a huge issue in the traditional housing area, and we put a lot of effort at dealing with that. And we wanted to move from benefits to work. We didn't want to be a niche player. We want to be relevant. When we talked to all of our customers, the one thing they talked about was they wanted to be part of society, not separate from it. They wanted to live in mixed tenure communities, not in the poor place. And they wanted to work and live in places that everybody else regarded as good places to live. And large monotenure, very concentrated areas of poverty weren't great for them, and they didn't really want them. So it wasn't anybody trying to be a social engineer. It was listening to what our customers were telling us, led us to some fairly strong conclusions. So we ended up coming up with a range of requirements from people. I'll give you a little example of this. Years and years ago, we did a regeneration scheme in Newcastle, as it happens, and I went to one of the communication consultation meetings, and I met the local parish priest, and I said, how's business? And he said, well, it's not great. He said, but at Christmas, it's amazing. So I said, well, what's so great about Christmas? And he said, well, everybody comes home. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, all the kids have moved away. So anybody who was bright, who had a bit of luck in life, who had a bit of get up and go, they all left. So that community was constantly being beheaded of all its talent. And the concentration of poverty was getting greater and greater and greater. And that didn't occur to us in 1997 as a great outcome for those people. It was not a great outcome for society. More importantly, to a degree, in a funny sort of way, it wasn't very commercial either. Because over time, those neighbourhoods will decline. They'll cost a fortune to maintain, they'll cost a fortune to manage, and they won't be popular. So those three things together with that thinking of the deep data about the business, led us to the conclusion that we wanted to move into 20 years ago. This wasn't some enthusiasm we had last Friday, that we'd want to move into a range of possibilities for people that actually also helps us to move 10 years from one place to another, as Tim has mentioned already, because if you don't have all of this, how does one practically do that? Well, you can't. So people talk about this, but they don't have the means to do it. And that was a big issue for us. And that led us to create a culture where we're constantly looking for innovation, not for its own sake, but as a consequence of listening to the deep data and what our customers are telling us. So we're now very heavily into what the customer needs of the future actually are. What does a digital society look like? What does an issue for people in the future mean for them? What about a more mobile society? I'll come on to elderly populations in a minute. But people who listen to what the data is telling them and their operational experience, inevitably, in my view, must therefore either decide they're not going to grow and change, or they must therefore find clever ways of doing that. And our approach is to try and learn from the market and the data and our experience, and then try things, learn, hopefully fail small, preferably succeed, and then move on to develop that. So you won't hear us banging on about these things, because we only talk about them when we've done them. And my colleagues all referred, each one of them, to something that had come from that thinking. Now, just to give a bit of backdrop to the UK, this is an area that very few people talk about. You've all seen this slide. This is the slide that is usually wheeled out to explain that if only we went back to the post-war years, everything would be fine, because we'd be producing more housing. The deep truth, when you really get into it, though, is that line along the bottom is actual net additions to the housing stock, because people fail to say that during the period of the 50s and 60s were also the periods of mass slum clearance. So thousands of properties were being demolished, as well as thousands improved. So it wasn't net additions at all, actually. And you look at that, and it's a completely different picture about the net additions to our housing stock than the usual arguments about, well, if only we can get back there, it'd be all cool, which is not true. I know it sounds nice, but it just isn't true. So an example, therefore, of really understanding deep data led us to the view that it wasn't necessarily the quantity of housing that we produced, although that was important and it's an issue for us. It was what it was and where it was that was most. It all sounds obvious, and yet I hear go to endless conferences. I spoke to one this week where people are going on and on and on about we just need to build more. Well, hang on. My experience is when we did do that, a lot of what was built wasn't that great, and much of it we're now regenerating. So I think some calmness and some analysis would be good before we leap down. I was going to put a cartoon in here, and it's a great one. There's two desks in a bank, and one's got a sign which says, obvious, popular but wrong, big crowd. And the other one says, really complicated, difficult but right, and there's one guy at the window. And I think that's the reality of it. Because it is much easier to look for the easy options, the easy prospects, the simple to explain things, and they're not real. And I'm not telling you that, I'm telling myself that, because it's a constant process for us to keep real. The other interesting issue is this whole question about tenure. Again, this is another slide you'll see. What we try to do, and we're not in the business of prophecy, but we try and understand how these things develop. So in 1997, as Chris said, first one of these we ever did, we took a bet that home ownership would start to decline, market rent would rapidly increase, and social housing would decline. And not because we're necessarily prophetic or brilliant, but that's exactly what happened, because it was obvious. Those trends were so deep, there were no obvious vectors that were going to change them. So you didn't have to be a genius to work out that was going to happen. So the next thing, and again you'll be familiar with this, we try and use a bit of vector analysis about where we think things are going. So irrespective of who wins the election on Thursday, and we've looked at all the detail of all the policies, we don't think there's going to be mass change, frankly. And so even if you add in both Labour and Conservative policies, it doesn't really matter. What's a big issue is the tribalism around social rent and home ownership. So, for example, the Conservative government, right, they make no secret of the fact that they're party of home ownership, and it's fallen on their watch, and it really bothers them. So that underlies a lot of their policy. But the problem is, because we don't have an understanding of the housing market as a system, tweaking with this has unintended consequences over here, and nobody really understands that. And equally, if you look at the social housing programme, that little arrow in the green going up is the impact of, even if you could build 100,000 social housing a year, and even if you could do that for every 1 or 5 years, and I really question that, it doesn't make that much difference in reality. It would for individuals, for sure. And then the other big issue for us, which I'll come on to in a minute, is when we start to understand the supply chain and the supply side mechanics of actually building this stuff, it's not great, really. And you look at any newspaper about the impact on subcontractors, The huge issues that tier one contractors have now is not a week goes by without somebody's having major issues. There's something wrong with the construction business. And so one of the reasons we worked this out 4 years ago was we needed to move to off-site manufacturing. And I know it's a big issue now and people talk about it a lot, but 4 years ago, we entered into a program where we tested it on 8 sites with 5 different providers. And to be honest, we made mistakes, we made them small, we learned a lot. And the reality is it's not about the product coming out of the factory. It's about getting it on site, the master planning of it, how you get the groundworks done. We learned about the whole process. Every factory I've ever been to, they tell you about the brilliant engineering that goes into the box. Great. How do you get it onto the site? Who's putting the foundations down? Who's organising the planning for that? Because planners are not used to it. And then the back end of it all is, and who's going to buy it? And how do you rent it? And are some products good for rent and some good for purchase? We've learned an awful lot about that. And one of the reasons we decided to move into the factory ourselves was we wanted to learn, again, test, data, work it out. So we found somebody who hadn't built a single house. Perfect partner for us. And we wanted to work out, could we get our designs produced in a modular way rather than just buying what other people were doing, which is not intel. There's a lot of suppliers now, so I don't overgeneralize, but that was an issue at the time. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to have a retail proposition where we had 5 or 6 different suppliers that we would then apply, pick and mix on the right schemes for the right way and the right way. So the deal we did this year with Ilke was very much focused on our affordable business. We tested it on 2 sites. And the most important issue is it turned out to be equivalent to traditional build costs. So if you can get something built twice as fast as you can conventionally, and you're a revenue-based, debt-based business, it's a no-brainer that you would do that. The problem is, can you do it well? And we've got 4 years of experience of how to do that, which we've not banged on about because, frankly, it's commercial advantage. Everybody I hear banging on about this cannot say that. And we tested it with people. We went through in a site in Swindon. We used a very interesting marketing campaign about who would not want to buy a 21st century precision engineered home. Because at the time, if you remember, there was a load of press, much of it undeserved, but nonetheless it influences the market, about 150 snags on new houses. You know, it didn't look cool, did it? So we were selling a 21st century precision engineered home. Why wouldn't you want to buy one of those? And the truth was, people did. So there's a lot of learning about this. Whenever anyone does anything new, it has to be proven. But the problem is, if everything has to be proven, no one does anything. So how do you get the balance right between innovation and risk awareness? And how do you test things and develop things and prove them and then roll them out slowly? Is a big issue for us, and it's one of the key things we do. Now, I know there's an enormous issue, absolutely rightly, follow the horrors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy on fire safety. So we own 21 buildings that are over 18 metres tall. None of them have AMC, ACM or similar cladding. I know that's not true of everybody, but we only get paid a bat for this team. And the reality is we don't have a massive issue here. We're well on with our sprinklers in those blocks as it is. We've consulted all the residents and we don't see that being a huge issue. But it is a big issue generally. I completely agree with that. We've had it for about 10 years now, a detailed partnership with Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Services. We have a framework agreement with them. They're our fire experts for the whole country, and they're great in talking to other fire services up and down the country, and it just works. So that's, I never, ever, ever want to be glib about fire safety or any sort of safety, but the numbers suggest that we don't have a huge issue in this area. Now, come back to my point about deep data, trying to understand things, failing small, all the rest of it. As Tim talked about, we're not in love with our assets. They are assets. And we aggressively, commercially try to manage them in a sensible way. And that also applies to the market. So we have a market-based approach. If the market's great, we'll do a bit more for sale. If it isn't, we won't. And being a Homes England partner is obviously helpful because we can do more grant-aided programs. But last year, we pulled back from home ownership anyway. And the reality is, as I hope I've explained, we never got into home ownership necessarily to make money. It was about mixed tenure neighbourhoods. How can we make that whole neighbourhood work by providing a range of housing for people so that the neighbourhood itself was economically stronger than it would have been if it was entirely made up of the poorer people in society. So there was a different logic for us that sustained us. And the first scheme we did, a mixed tenure scheme, was in 1997 in Watford. I remember it well. And it was perceived as a work of the devil at the time. Now everyone does it. And that was another example. Listen to the market, develop something small, try it, roll it out when it works. And equally now, there is the downturn that we already talked about last year, because I looked at my last year's presentation, we did, is still there. It's probably going to be amplified by whatever happens around Brexit now. And the reality is we already moved away from home ownership last year. We're continuing to do that. And we will continue to grow our affordable and other tenures. But there are other things we can do. So as Debbie talked about Living Plus, it's the supported housing arm of the group. And one of the really good things there, looking at the data, we came across quite a lot of pretty well-funded charities, but they didn't have real estate arms. So they were struggling with how did they get places to run. And so we created a real estate arm. We now offer it to the charities. It's spectacular. It yields really well. They're happy, we're happy. We find the properties, we manage it, and they do what they do really well, which is charity work. And that was another example of spotting what other people don't see, a gap in the market, something that works, trying it, rolling it out and developing it. And equally in the assisted living programs that Debbie talked about, we're growing those as well. Again, a lot of them are grant funded. One of the interesting issues about the way we've worked with people is when we talk to the people we work with, their ambition is to meet their aspirations, not just their needs. They want to live a good life. We're doing a load of work at the moment about improving customer services. If you read the green paper and the white paper, it's all about the tenant voice. Our experience is that people want a good service, they want to be listened to, they want to be treated like customers. So that's what we do. It's a constant work in progress. We're constantly trying to improve it. We've done a ton of work over the last year about the customer journey. We've gone through every single one of our businesses to understand the customer journey, how we can improve it. Do we do things people value? Can we do it, as Debbie talks about, more efficiently? We're on a major drive at the moment to find ways of becoming more efficient, only doing what the customer values. And this is the sort of thing that nobody sees, but it does lead to better margins and better outcomes. And we're committed to all of that. And the interesting issue is, as we've developed to offer choice and flexibility and moved through this, we've started in housing provision, neighbourhood regeneration. We've moved through all these processes. It has been a journey, a very structured, risk-aware, do one thing at a time journey, not an instant move from one thing to another. Additionality is a big issue for us. We've talked about the Homes England deal, which definitely adds additionality. We created a fund management business. We created a relationship with the Scottish Government. First time we've ever persuaded government to put money into a fund that we then leverage by raising money in the fund to then build 1,000 properties at 20% below the market range. We've done that in Scotland. There's no reason we couldn't do it in England. It's a groundbreaker. Nobody's ever done it before. And we could only do that because we were a fund manager. So we were able to leverage our capacity as a developer, as a master planner, as a fund manager, with a relationship with local government and central government to create a new product. And we want to do that in England. There's no reason why not. It makes total sense. The idea that government would put money into a fund and it would still be its money and it would then build 1,000 houses is a no-brainer. It's just there was previously no platform for doing that. And equally, when we acquired the Aviva Igloo Fund, it was to do the same thing. Everybody was banging on about local authority pension funds, the trillions of pounds, but there was no real funnel to get any of that money into local environmental and regeneration schemes. So we now have the Urban Transformation Fund, which has got 3 relationships in Glasgow, Newcastle and Nottingham, and we're now working on one in Bristol. If we can create those sorts of platforms in a very ordered, risk-aware, considered way, then our relationship with our reputation with local government will increase. And if we can work with local government to understand what its needs are, and the reality is, it doesn't need capital, it needs revenues. So if we can create a proposition, and Mary talked about it in this particular one is in Surrey, The reality was that because we could do all of these things, we could then work with them on the real exam question is, how do I turn, if I'm a local authority, my capital assets, not into capital, because what am I going to do with that? Into revenues, because and children's services, education, that's the problem. The problem is revenue over the long term. Now, you could invest in a shopping centre, I would advise you not to, or you could do what Surrey County Council smartly did and said, right, we've got these capital assets, let's go to the market and see how we can create a deal where we can turn those capital assets into revenues. And we won that because we can do all of these things. And we won it because of that, and other people couldn't. It's beyond me why other people don't move into this space, because it's a no-brainer. It's hard to do, and I'm making it sound glib and easy, I know, and it isn't. But the capacity of these businesses to work in their own space and have the desire and the capability to come together to create new products is truly amazing and transformative, and it's getting a lot of traction in the market. And we developed this very carefully over time in very risk-aware ways. All of these businesses work, and we're not necessarily in love with those assets, but they do work. But equally, if one is true to my word about deep data and trying to understand what's going on in the world, there are other big megatrends going on. Climate change is a huge issue, and we're very aware of it, and we've already done some major schemes, such as the Dream to deal with the EU, long may that continue, where we got grant from the EU to actually do a deep retrofit of housing stock to find out how to make it work. Because everybody will tell you this is doable. My big question is always how. So the Dream project was 100 properties. We deeply retrofitted it, and all of the numbers are down to zero carbon, right? So we know how to retrofit existing properties, which is going to be the big challenge. Moving to a situation where we deal with new supply is, relatively speaking, easy compared to the retrofitting challenge. So we're on with this already, and we have in the group a Director of Innovation and Technology whose sole focus is on the how of climate change. How do we deal with getting properties to zero carbon? Big issues about ageing populations. When we started to look at the fact that we already were in the market for providing retirement properties, people were telling us that they wanted a market rent or a for sale offer. And if you look at the chart on tenure, one of the things that was really stark is that the number of people who've paid their mortgage is now greater than the people who've got a mortgage. People don't spot this. So that cements where the housing wealth is. And it's unsurprisingly among those who are older. So one of the big policy challenges is how do those people come through the housing stock to allow vacancies for other people to move in, because they don't. So we did a massive exercise with those people. And one reason, not the only one, but one reason was that they didn't see anything in the market they would want to buy. It wasn't there. Then we did further research, and the truth is, in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, the provision of that sort of accommodation is between 10 and 20 times what it is in the UK. So the next obvious question is, well, why isn't somebody doing something about this? And what would it look like? So we did further research about what people really wanted, and then we decided to go into that space, and we were looking for the mid-market. People fight above the top, the most expensive market, and they fight at the lower end. We always look for the mid-market because it's the deepest and the biggest. So we then created a proposition where we built 3 retirement villages to find out how to do it. It's student housing 15 years ago in terms of fund managers. It will be a massive asset class in the future, but at the moment, few people know how to do it well. So we're learning how to do it well. Once we do it well, again, fail small, learn how to do it, roll it out. So right across the business, we try our best to understand what's going on in society. We try to understand the how of what we could do about it, and then we try to create sensible and managed ways of providing products and services. Test them. If they work, good. If they don't, shoot them and move on. Now, people talk about ESG a lot, and there are various people with kite marks and all sorts of things flying about. The truth is we are deeply an ESG organisation, and we just don't have a kite mark. We can actually show the impact of that social impact on society. So leisure's an interesting area. when people say, what's your health and well-being strategy, I normally tell them, well, we teach 82,000 kids a week to swim. What do you do? Because it's a pretty strong proposition. What's interesting about leisure, it also commercially works. But what's even more important is it changed the relationship we have with local government. So they don't see us in our housing terms anymore. They don't see us as a competitor who wants to take their stock. They all love leisure. So that example Mary had in the slide about how we developed a leisure centre as part of a major regeneration scheme is the first of many. Nearly every local authority has got a problem like that, and there's no one who does all of it. And that's just the first. And that particular scheme is also interesting because it's a development management deal. We're doing it with the council's money. It's just they couldn't find anybody in the delivery space who could do it all, and they have now. So that's another shop window for us to present to local government. We win a lot of awards. Everybody's got to be an award winner these days, and we win our fair share. We won another 2 last night. And I like the ones that the industry recommends us for. You know, the ones you don't have to apply for. We keep winning them or being recommended for them. So we clearly, by this measure, have a good reputation. The important point for me is about keeping it. So I have a thing in the group called improvement on previous best. Nobody's saying you're bad. You might be really good, but you can always, always, always be better. And that's a driver for us right across the piece. I don't know about you, but I come across organisations who have improvement fatigue. You know, they're constantly trying to improve, and the staff in them say, come on, what do you want? We're doing pretty well now. Yeah, but you can always do better. So improvement on previous best, everybody gets. And it's a big element within our organisation that's what we want to do. We want to be not just good, we want to be brilliant. And we're constantly on a journey to get there. And this is one process that keeps us on our mettle, keeps us very self-critical, always never shouting about things, because we don't talk about things until we've done them. So if you ask me what our operating model is for the next few years, it would be this, really, that we want to develop, grow, and deliver and improve. They're the big things we want to do, and there's a whole mild set of issues within that: margin improvement, building more homes, growth in each market. But the big issues are about, are we really understanding what the market's telling us? Are we very, very, very humble about what our customers are telling us, and are we acting on it? And have we got the wit to understand what the future holds, and can we prepare now for it? I don't know about you, but I'm sick of people telling me about the future. The future's today. It's now. It's not what's going to happen next week, 3 weeks' time, 4 weeks' time, or 10 years' time. It's happening now. So we need to be working on climate change propositions today, and that's what we're doing. And a big issue for me is serving a customer, maintaining a brand, creating and managing places that work for everyone. We're an inclusive organisation. We believe in inclusiveness for everybody in society, and that's one of the things that really drives us as a business. And the way we do it, we're deeply long-term. We have a very long-term view about asset holding. We can acquire assets, we stabilise them, increase their value, but we're very happy to sell them later on. We take a long-term view about big places. Mary talked about Gilston Park. That's been a long-term programme for us. We're very committed to quality mixed-use, mixed tenure places, and we're interested in a range of product services, and we're dynamic. We're constantly learning from our operational experience, what's happening on the front line, what society's telling us, what data's telling us. And that end-to-end offer supply chain is currently unique in the market, much to my surprise. It is amazing that no one else seems to be following us, but it's getting a lot of traction. And as increasingly local government and state agencies have these major problems, they need people who can actually practically work with them. So the joint venture growth Mary talked about, I see continuing. It's something we offer. We genuinely want to work with them. It de-risks the problem for both of us. It just makes sense. And a deep sense of improvement on previous best. We have a mantra about you can't predict the future, but you can invent it. And we're very, very busy inventing that future. And I want to, again, reiterate our thanks to you, our funders, for helping us on this journey to invent the future. Thank you very much.